want to break it to you, but sex education of the past failed us. Because birds and bees, they don't fuck! Welcome to Birds and Bees Don't Fuck, a podcast where we learn exactly how bad our formative sex education, or lack thereof, really was. I'm your host, Arielle Zadok. I'm a sex educator, intimacy coordinator, and a whole lot of other things. My guest today is an Emmy Award winning puppeteer, creative producer, improviser, and fellow brave soul who has spent the last 3 years keeping sets safe from the virus we shall not mention. Welcome to the show, Oliver Berger! Yay!
Oh, the crowd goes wild. How are we? How are things? Happy to be here.
Goodness, it is so good to have you on the show. We have lived multiple lives together, sir.
It's true. We got to know each other, and then the world stopped, and then we got to know each other again, and then the world stopped again, and now we're back to where we are.
And now we're back to getting to know each other once again. What a delightful thing.
I'm so happy about it. And happy to be here. Happy to talk about this subject matter.
Yeah, it's, we do kids improv, so why not talk about when we were kids?
Why not talk about it? Just bring it right back up again.
Just bringing it right back to that little childhood of ours. So good. Oh, Oliver, where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Beverly Hills, California.
Oh, my goodness!
I know. It's a long, far, small town that barely anyone's heard of.
Was it actually 90210?
It was actually 90210. It was always the first question that I was asked. And I'm second generation Beverly Hills. So it's an interesting, hearing stories of my mom growing up in the 70s in Los Angeles was always fun.
Wow. Oh, my God. Now I want to talk to your mom.
Yeah, no, I wish you the best of luck. No, it's a weird place to grow up. There's a thin veneer of vanity to every conversation that you wouldn't necessarily have if you're in the Midwest or somewhere else. And it's interesting when I moved away to learn that not everyone had that childhood.
Yeah. I had a really similar experience growing up in New York because that's everything that you know. And so this place that is so well known to other people and it's a character to other people and it's an aspiration to other people. But for you as a little kid, you're just it's just the city. Whatever. This is where we go to the doctors. I don't know. And then you come to this point in your life where you're like, this is a thing. This is so everybody knows this place because it's a place worth knowing? What?
Yeah, I guess it's weird. And it's funny. I don't get starstruck. You and I both work in the industry, and it's this thing of people will warn people hey, don't make a thing of it. Don't get starstruck. I've never had that mechanism in me, and it's been a thing of just no, they're another person in traffic. So every time growing up, I'd be like, oh, did you hear this premiere's going on? I'm like, oh, okay, great. That means it's gonna take me 20 more minutes to get home.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Hadass trucks are just blocking the way. It's just, yeah. And in New York, people go to New York to be hidden because New Yorkers don't give a fuck who you are. We just want you out of our way. Or nobody, listen, it's not my business what you're doing. It's not your business what I'm doing. Let's not get involved in each other's shit. I don't care who you are. You're just whatever. And then I think when it comes to us and our jobs, it's I have a job to do. You have a job to do. Your job happens to mean that the rest of the world sees you doing your job every day, but the rest of the world doesn't see me doing my job every day. But both of our jobs are just as valuable on this exact set. So you're not better than me and I'm not better than you. We're all here to co-create something. Hopefully
there's an equilibrium. There's a give and take to it. And it's funny that you mentioned New York. I grew up here, went to Pittsburgh, did New York, and then ended up in Chicago. And during New York was the closest I felt to home, where I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is just LA, but faster.
Yeah.
It's LA and they put garbage in the streets, but it's charming. But it was this thing of growing up and thinking of what New York was and thinking around theater life, that was that world. And when I got there, I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is LA, but with less space. It's just we're all on top of each other. So the attitudes are just slightly a little bit quicker.
I hated
Loved
LA.
it.
I hated
Oh,
LA for years. But as a New Yorker, I feel like we're bred to hate New Jersey and Los Angeles. Those
yeah. And that
are like the
and
two things.
it's fair. That's the thing. After living in the Midwest, I learned it's completely warranted.
Yeah.
As it turned, like you can't. The idea of a double talk there is something that is like a faux pas. So when you're out here, it's like, oh, you know this person. Oh yeah, I was on their desk. This thing did this. And if you say that anywhere else, they're like, why are you you?
Why are you?
Can we do whatever this is, but not?
Can we not? Can we just,
Can,
and
we
it's
just
interesting.
not?
Yeah, can we just not? I mean, New Yorkers are Europeans as well, very straight to the point. Like, I don't need to fluff you up. So that's something in my professional life that I've had to learn living in places like Florida and New Zealand and Los Angeles, where people are like, we like the light and fluffy. And I'm like, listen, we got to get shit done. Like, I'm here to do a thing. I'm going to ask you the question. I'm going to call you.
I need you to tone down this toxic optimism so we can all operate on the same level here.
I mean,
you all seem so happy.
You don't care how I am, okay? You don't care. I don't have a kid. I don't have a husband. You got nothing to ask me about because you don't care about my dog, and you certainly don't care about my pole dancing. So, like, let's just cut to the chase here.
Let's just keep going. Let's just get it done. And they're like, well, but I was going to tell you the entirety of my grandmother's souffle recipe. And I'm like, I don't have time. No, thank you.
I don't eat dairy, so I can't.
There it is. You get out of the souffle. That's an easy
I get out of the souffle. Yeah, it is an interesting thing. I mean, it's code switching. That's something that, POCs and Black people specifically have had to be doing their entire existence. And it is something that when you live in different places and you're working in different atmospheres, you have to code switch based off of those people. And that's not something that everyone understands. That's actually something, just kind of tying it back to what we've been doing for the last 3 years. That's something that I had to teach a lot of my managers was like, listen, you are in a different location or you're in a different circumstance, and you have to understand that you need to deliver these messages in a way that the people that you're talking to are going to receive it. And you're going to talk to a grip a lot differently than you're going to talk to your number one. It's just the reality. You have to code switch based off of the audience that you're speaking to, or else they're not going to receive the message. And our job is to make sure that we're communicating things clearly so that, we're all on the same team and we can keep people safe. And, there's a lot of stuff that people feel about COVID and masks and all and testing and all the things. So we have to make sure that we're in a position where we're having these conversations in a way that people can actually receive them.
Well, it's so funny. The past few years have really reminded me of the same exact mechanisms you did. When I was on tour, part of the whole thing of like when you're touring a show, the town you're walking into is the sentiment that you can go up to. Yeah. And if you're doing improv in those towns, you need to know where that line is that you can cross so you can tiptoe over it. George Carlin said it's the job of a good comedian to take people up to the line of comfort and discomfort and push them just over and then make them glad that they did that. And it's this whole thing of that was what our job was. It was to quickly read the scenario, realize where we're pushing too far, realize where we can go and get to the next thing. So it was finding that balance. But in LA, we don't have to do any of that. You just go, hey, come on. Come on. What are you doing, pal? Who's it for?
Oh, my God.
That's the moneymaker. Don't give it away for free. Yeah. Come
on. Don't be giving away those moneymaker moves.
Don't do that.
Oh, man. So, all right. Before you went to the Midwest, so how much time did you spend in Beverly Hills before you went to the Midwest? Did you go to the Midwest when you were older? Was that a more adult thing that you did, or a more adult thing that you did? Did you do
exactly.
Your adult work in the Midwest?
I did my first residency. No, I was born and raised out here, so I was out into LA until I was 18. I had my 18th birthday in Chicago. And the 2 summers before I had gotten to explore 2 other places. But for the most part, like growing up, I did not leave LA. I never went to sleepaway camp. I never did any of the things that like took me out of Los Angeles. So the idea of a culture shock and like a different way of thinking was quick and aggressive, and you had to learn fast. And that was a very interesting scenario. But like all of what I knew formatively was Los Angeles.
Yeah. And did you go to a public school or a private school?
I went to a very private school.
Oh, juicy.
Yes. So, and we'll get into that when we get to the sex education stuff, because I will happily name the school that did it wrong first. But I was in public school and did normal thing. And then as our generations know, there was the gifted program. And that's where, like, if the kid was annoying in class, but they were smart, you would go to do the gifted program. But the problem was I had learning disabilities, and I still do. And these disabilities presented them in ways where you could talk to me and I could be very verbose and I could understand a conversation. But if you handed me a book, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't read.
Yeah.
So it put me into a very weird scenario where my expectation of output was very high, but the ability for input was very low. And it was mostly everything that I learned, and this will tie into the sex ed of it all, was from movies and TV. So because I couldn't read, the rule was in my household, as long as it's educational, I don't mind if you keep watching it. And that was just the running rule. And plus I was a kid with insomnia who was over medicated. So I'm up all night. So all I do is watch whatever was after 10 o'clock on different pay-per-view channels. And that was part of where I was like, oh, okay, wait, what? What is this thing? And breakfast would always be the awkward carpool ride to the school where it'd just be like, they did this thing on the show last night. And she's like, that's not educational. What are you? I'm like, but I didn't know about it.
That's not what I meant, kid.
Yeah. So it was always this fun little give and take. So I did that. I went to a private school called Park Century, and they claimed their whole thing was for all the kids that fell through the cracks, you were one of two options. There was this company out in Oregon where if someone was a troubled child or a child that wasn't fitting in, you could send your kid there. It's out in the wilderness. It's a reprogramming type thing that you would do. And it's the last resort with a lot of kids who have behavioral or learning disabilities. Cut to hearing about Park Century. And they promised us a place that they were going to alter the way that they taught. They would let the kids lead and they would teach them the ways that they need to learn. And basically it was almost like an X-Men Institute, but the whole thing wasn't true. And they were setting it up for it to be this situation. And while I'm sure there are kids that got help there, and I'm glad that I went there instead of Oregon, it wasn't until I got to my middle school for one last year and then high school, Bridges Academy, that I actually was able to learn and be in that world. Now, that said, my graduating class was 12 people. Of that 12, there were 2 females. Of the people that went on to college, there were only 8 of us. Of the people who graduated college, there were only 4.
Wow.
But here's the flip side. The flip side was 2 of the graduating people that graduated from my class that weren't going off to college or anything else went off to work for NASA. One went off to work for IBM and is the basis for one of their AI centers. It was a school for geniuses, but they all couldn't function in regular schools.
Yeah.
So it was this really weird world. And myself and my best friend were 2 of the only ones amongst a group of 7 of us who could talk to people. Most people had either like autism or something of that regard, where they didn't have the ability to speak or have that ability to be cordial. So it was an interesting world to have to learn in non-conventional methods, but also try to get some of the education that we were supposed to have.
That's so interesting. I was literally having this conversation this morning about this exact same topic about neurodivergence and how I was really similar. I'm also neurodivergent and I could never read. And there was one class that I got an A in. It was an English class. Every single test was reading a book and having conversations. I didn't read a single page of any book because my brain just doesn't do it.
But you talked around it and got other people to answer the question for you? Yep.
Yeah. Like the whole thing was discussions, and I could carry those discussions and I could take off of what other people were saying and like the minimal points that were given to us about the book and like just, quick inserts of information, but based off of the conversations, I could ask high mileage questions and I could have thoughts and opinions on what we were talking about. And I wound up being one of the people speaking more than anything else. Maybe that's a Leo thing, but there is such a disservice that happens to humans when we're forcing all of us to learn in this exact same way. And I had this conversation this morning with a friend of mine, and her partner is one of those super smart, like NASA, he's a SpaceX guy, and she is a genius designer, both like really, eccentric, brilliant people. and they both struggled with school. And I think he is neurodivergent, she's not, but like for both of them, the regular school system, as you were saying, was just not built for them. She kind of learned one way to work around it. He didn't. I don't think he went to college or anything like that, but he went on to do like these extraordinarily brilliant things with his mind. And it just goes to show that like this school system that we have is bullshit, and it's not built for everybody. We can't all learn the same way.
It's interesting that you mention it. It's also not just the high school system. It's also the college system too. And if you had asked high school Oliver what he was going to do, he was going to go do musical theater. He was going to get into a good conservatory. He had just done the Carnegie Mellon program. He just did Tisch. This is time. He's going to follow that path.
Yep.
And like, that's what I was good at. And it was a thing of I took the same mechanism, our defense mechanism of being like, cool, I'm going to ask someone a quick question and then I'm going to go off of that opinion and make a bunch of assumptions, but do it confidently.
Yeah. Yep. Confidence is key.
And if I'm wrong, then make it feel like they're teaching us something and then like, oh, that wasn't true? Well, what is it?
Oh, I didn't think about it that way. And then they talk and
they fill out that answer. Yeah. Oh, well, why would the character do that? And those little things that you would do, I thought that's what it was. It's just doing crowd work. It's just, that's all you're doing from a very young age. And it was interesting that when I got to college, despite being able to do everything else that the other kids could do, I could not read sheet music. I will never be able to do it.
Same. Oh my God.
I can sing. Yeah. And I know you can too. And this is part of what we bonded with when we were doing shows together. But it's that thing, if you play me at once and I got it, I'm ready for you to go. I can look at the page of sheet music and the notes will move. Yeah. And no college that was a BFA program at the time was willing to give someone a degree in musical theater without the ability to sight read. Mm-hmm. So it turned into a thing of, thank God I found the Columbia College Chicago program that eventually would become the Comedy Studies program, and ended up graduating from that, which was, okay, cool. You understand musical theater and musical comedy. This is the same part of your brain. You can make this work. So it's that interesting thing of, if you let us find our own and let us find what works to our brain, we'll learn so much. Yeah. But if you force that one methodology, it doesn't help anyone. To do a checklist or a curriculum that is widespread doesn't work. Mm-mm.
No, our brains process information in different ways. And in college, I had to do auditions with sheet music. I don't know how I did it, but I did somehow. Like it was like
Did you do it based off of how high up the note was?
Yeah.
And how low, and that's, you just guessed where the drop was.
Exactly. Like I would listen to the accompaniment. I would look at these things on the page that I had tried so hard. Like I tried to learn piano. I've tried to learn guitar. I've tried to learn sight reading. Like I've done all of these things, but it never connected in my brain. I'm also very bad at math, and I think that these things are all connected. It's how you interpret information.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like I think they're all really similar parts of your brain. I don't have the research on that. I would like to get it. But again,
I know a fair bit about that stuff, and that's like sort of the situation that I'm always in. It's funny because whenever my partner and I, my business partner and I go out to a lunch, you will automatically see me slide the check to him, but I'll put my card on it.
Yeah, you do the math.
It's not, you do the math. I can't. I'm either going to tip them the best tip of their life, or I'm going to wildly offend someone. And I won't know the difference until I see their facial reaction in a few minutes.
The funny thing for me is that I wound up as a producer. So I'm literally doing math all the time, but I'm working within systems. Like I'm working within budgets. So I'm so good with money.
And that's what we've had to do.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I don't like, as long as the formulas are there, I'm so good with that money. I will play and I will finagle, because that's the problem solving. And our brains have always had to look at these problems and just figure out our way to do it. And that's probably why we're successful at those things, even though producing and UPMing and all of that stuff is like literally all math. I mean, it's not all math. Yeah. It's conversation. It's so much more. No, but you're in the math so much.
You're in the math so much. And like from my producing stuff too, it's like that there would be moments where I'd be like, okay, cool. I've got the budget. And then I just lean over and be like, quick question. These numbers are the numbers I put on here, right? Mm-hmm. Great. And then I can go into it. Mm-hmm. But it's a thing of, you have to add those fail safes.
Yeah.
That's just part of the brain. Like when it comes to writing, if you were to read my writing just straight out, it doesn't work the reason my partner and I work so well is he's learned how to take what I'm saying and it'd be like, oh, no, you meant this. And I'm like, no, I did mean that. That is correct. And we'll work together to get the solution. And it's funny because recently with AI and where it's at, I use Grammarly like nobody's business. The fact that it can give me a moment to go, okay, take a second. Did you mean to say this?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, no, I meant to say that. Send it. Or, oh, actually, that flipped. That I just said cancel everything, not green. Like it's a weird thing. So it's just making sure you have it all right.
Yeah, I think it's a real beautiful thing that we have all of these tools to support us. And it is a really interesting conversation with the writer's strike that by the time this airs is for sure still going to be going on, and everything involved there with AI. And we do need to be creating these fail safes because, there are people that want that to take over. And it's like, no, you need the humanity in there. We need, it's still the humans that need to input all the information. So the whole AI thing is like, woof, there's so many avenues, but I think if we can use those types of tools in terms of different neurodivergence and brain abilities and how can we use these tools to support us, same thing with like therapy and astrology and all these other tools that we have, like how can we use these tools to support humans but not take away from humans? Like
they're tools in a tool belt.
Exactly.
That's the thing. We're just making more and more options for us to create with.
Exactly.
And that's what I think is important.
Mm-hmm.
But that brings me back to when it go back to, if you don't mind me steering it this way, the curriculum of sexual education and the way that it's presented.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a very interesting thing because I left public school education in 4th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So right around the time that you're supposed to be starting to be introduced to this kind of stuff, I went from that into this private school. So my first brush with sexual education was at a school that wasn't doing exactly what it needed to be doing. And it's no fault of their own, but they were using standard teaching rubrics for kids they knew were neurodivergent and knew weren't going to pay attention.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we had to do is either through jokes, through media, or through any other means. That's where you had to learn. And you had to figure that out. So it was this weird world to be formulating what you are going to act on in the future, especially when you're acting with someone else. Mm-hmm. Like knowing that what your ramifications aren't just what you're learning about you. You need to learn about the other person.
Do you remember what age you started getting those classes? Was it in 4th grade when you made that switch, or do you remember some of those first experiences?
So I specifically remember, so I was a year behind when I was in public school. And then I made the transition over to the private institution. So I would say I was the age of a 6th grader, but I was a 5th grader.
Okay, that makes sense.
It was 5th grade that first conversation happened. Mm-hmm. And then their whole thing at that place was that they're going to do it in multiple stages rather than all at once. So you took a class in 5th, you took one in 6th, then you took one in 7th.
Age appropriate sex education.
They introduced some stuff. Yeah, it was this thing of like, okay, cool, sure. But at the same time, what was crazy about it is that this was a school for kids that a lot of them had social cue problems. Mm-hmm. So the stuff that you would see about flirting and the stuff you would see about that wasn't really happening around you. That like I didn't really have that experience. On top of that, I was a giant nerd. So the idea of that happening wasn't really something that was going to happen until I started doing theater on the outside because my school had no theater program. So the place that I went to theater was the first time I was ever really around girls or women or someone who wasn't like that, because at the time, the running methodology was the vast majority of people who are neurodivergent or at least presented with ADD and ADHD were male, which has been proven to be false
100%
since because
hello, and it's even though I was diagnosed, but still.
But the vast majority of the kids that were put that way, they just wrote it off to, it's the guys are doing it. And then there were people that just didn't know. Yeah. They didn't know they were that. And years later, I'll be talking to someone. They're like, so wait, you have trouble focusing with this? Wait, maybe I have it. Mm-hmm. And they'll end up going through testing. They're like, turns out I've had dyslexia or adult ADD this whole time. Mm-hmm. I wish someone had taken what was going on with me seriously.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I was diagnosed and then it was ignored for my whole life, and I was re-diagnosed a couple of years ago. So, you know, even those of us that were diagnosed, because it presents differently in girls are more like we're floaty and we're over here and we're over there and we're quiet. I was a really quiet kid, believe it or not. Boys are more, that's where you see that hyperactivity. So it was treated differently 100%. And so many people flew under the radar because of that.
Yeah. And it's also, there's a certain amount of shame that's put around it too.
There was.
Where it was this, and that was the most interesting part, was seeing, and it's not a one for one, but it's something that I've realized since, which is just the idea that the shame and stigma side of sex and sex education, the idea of what a stigma was something I was taught very early, not in the context of sex, but in the concept of what you can do and who you are and what you say and what you don't say. And what do you share with a life partner? What do you share with someone else? How do you function? And what is a taboo? So like the idea of that, I didn't know it to have the sexual ramifications, but also just, I thought of it as just education based, and it wasn't. It turns out it's the same exact type of guilt. It's the same type of misinformation. So it's just presented in a different forum.
Yeah. So there's something that you said before that I found interesting, that were you learning about things like flirting and dating and all of that stuff in your programs?
Not in any formalized setting.
Okay.
Everything that I knew, almost to a comedic level, I either learned through reading plays, watching Showtime and HBO shows, or hearing jokes from like old movies that now have since been proven to not be situations.
Yeah.
But hearing the old school jokes that have since dated themselves, my assumption until I started dating and getting into that world was that that's how it worked. That these depictions of that in media were what you're supposed to do. Whether you thought it was comfortable or thought it was right, that's the system. That's what I'm learning from. I'm learning from these things. And it was an interesting thing to, in real time, once I was in Chicago and in college, very quickly learn, no, that's not how things work.
Also, theater kids are really horny. Like, I think it's so funny because speaking of stigmas, I think there is such stigma around theater kids of being like nerds and not getting laid and this and that. But like, holy shit, we are a horny group of people.
I was the only straight male amongst my musical theater friends. And so I was the straight musical theater kid.
You were that guy.
So that was the fun.
Yep.
And I know it. I'm aware of the monster I am. No, but it's the thing of like realizing, oh, wait a minute. No, you have no idea what you're doing. And like, being afraid to ask certain questions. And because we're theater people, we pretend that we know what we're doing about certain things. And unfortunately, until you see and make the connections, at least in my brain, until I saw things where I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that scene from All My Sons, that means something. There are lines there that are like, why would you say something? Well, why would it matter that I told anyone? And like realizing, oh, no, two people were involved in that act. You have to have both people on the same page at all times, or else that's not even. That's not consent. That's not something where you can have a dialogue about something. And I would ask teachers about it, and they'd come up in class. But I'll never forget, and every theater kid has this story, which is the first time they had a kiss scene.
Yeah.
And like, that's the first time you have to do that, and how big of a deal it was at the time. And you're like, okay, well, it's not at all now that we're adults. But at the time, the problems and the things and the questions that it brings up. And I distinctly remember I was in college. We were assigned a scene from Star Spangled Girl.
Yeah.
And it's the kissing part. And I remember the teacher being like, you two good with kissing scenes, right? And both of us just nodded our head. And we continued through, and we did it in class and that sort of thing. And she said on day one, when we met to rehearse, I was like, hey, I haven't had to do a kissing scene on stage before. It's not that I haven't kissed people before, but like, we should have this conversation now as to what this is. It's just acting. And she goes, I don't want to rehearse it even. I just want to do it live on the day. And I was like, oh, okay.
Okay. This was your scene
It's
partner
going to
that
come
said
up.
this, or
This is my scene
okay.
partner who said this. And I was like, is it something I'm doing that's not making you feel comfortable? Like I took a mint. I do all the different things that we need to do, but this is what we were assigned. This is the job. And I remember her distinctly saying, I don't feel comfortable doing that so you don't get the wrong idea.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I realized in that moment that while my male brain was going, this is ridiculous, it took a minute for me to go, hold on a second here. She's having this adverse of a reaction to this. This means that probably she has been through something that she A, doesn't want to talk about, B, shouldn't have to talk about unless she's comfortable, but also she just laid out what she wanted. She just said the very thing that she would like to have happen. And if it's counter to what the assignment is, then you need to either have a conversation about it or work around it. And I went to my teacher and I asked about it. I was like, hey, I don't know what to do here. Because like we're line perfect, but what happens in this scenario? And intimacy coordination, and I'm glad to hear you're heading into that world as well, but we didn't have necessarily that situation at that moment.
No.
And specifically in the theater space and the musical theater space, that's still sort of a place where you're given very blunt feedback and expected to take a note, and you're not expected to ask questions. So when someone feels uncomfortable about something, there is a question of, am I allowed to say something? If I say something, am I going to be fired? Am I going to be replaced for having an opinion? And it's a very interesting world to realize in that moment that it took me until college to even see that, oh, wait a minute, everyone else has their own trauma. Everyone else has their own story. Don't push it. So sure enough, we didn't push it until the final day of the thing. And we did it once before we went on stage, just in the dry run through. And then we did it during the final. And it was nothing. It was absolutely nothing to me. And afterwards, she came up and she was like, I appreciate you waiting until that end. And I was like, I'm fine with it. I didn't mean to push or anything like that. You seemed like you had a problem with it. And she explained to me her story, which is her story, and I'm not going to get into it. But she explained to me why she didn't feel that way. And at the end of it, I started to realize, okay, wait a minute. Everyone's basis for what they think is supposed to happen is different. It's not something that we can cognitively say at the time because we're very emotional in that moment. But taking a minute to go, are we on the same page? Do we know what this is? What is this going? And it's easy for me in my 30s to now look back and say that sort of thing. But to be perfectly frank, I was not that eloquent for most of my 20s.
Of course not.
And having to figure that out in those little moments. Yeah. And it's those things of like cognitively realizing, oh no, there's repercussions to your actions.
And I mean, listen,
so thank you, theater system.
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly why intimacy directors and coordinators are so important, because you say, it's different as adults. It's not actually different as adults. It's not. It's absolutely not.
No.
To say they kiss.
No, we're more like high school now than we are back then.
Yeah. I mean, to say they kiss passionately, what does that mean? Where are the hands going to go? What are we seeing? Do you need to see tongue? Do you not need to see tongue? That makes it a very different scene to shoot or perform on stage. Who feels comfortable where, what, and it doesn't even have to do with someone's past trauma. But in the case of your scene partner, for example, it could just be societal pressures and the cultural context of what it is for a girl to kiss a boy, for example, even if it's fake. And what danger does that put her in? Because you are intrinsically in a position of power as the male in the situation. And so...
And had a male teacher.
So she couldn't go to anybody should anything go wrong. And I'm so proud of her in her small human self for saying that and saying, I don't feel comfortable doing this, because the vast majority of people don't feel comfortable, especially at that age. And thank you for creating space for her to do that as well, because it is really important. Not all scene partners are like that. Not all situations are like that. And it's really difficult. And no one needs to be put in that situation. And so, I mean, I could rattle off about intimacy coordinating until the cows come home. And I love me some cows. They're adorable. There are so many layers to why we need that. And a big part of it is sex education too. And what types of scenes that we're doing. And actors should never, ever, ever be asked or have to pull from their personal experiences in any sexual scene, in any vulnerable scene. You should not have, just because you take young kids, for example, let's say that was her first kiss. As an actor, you don't have to ever have kissed anybody to be able to perform a kiss, and it's not anybody's business whether you have or whether you haven't. And by having that additional person there to navigate that for you removes the possibility that somebody's going to ask you about it, because you know what? Motherfuckers be asking these questions, and they shouldn't be.
Well, it's also it's funny because I'm now connecting it even further down the line of like the shows that I did and the shows that I was assigned and the lessons I took from each one, and how it actually learning a lot of lessons along those lines. And I think back to conversations throughout that. Like I remember, I distinctly remember I was 18 years old when I did Cabaret. Mm-hmm. Like that was a show that is rather risque, and you shouldn't be having. It's dicey to be doing that content then.
Oh yeah.
But I had to ask a lot of questions, even though we were doing a nerfed version of the show that was a little bit more nerfed than what it normally would be. But still having to ask my parents and be like, what does he mean? Like, there's sexual innuendo. I know there's sexual innuendo here. What does this joke mean? Why is this funny? Like, and having to learn that. And then I remember, and this was just me being comfortable with my sexuality at the time. To the credit of the director of that show, I got cast as the MC. I still haven't done really anything at that time. And he had a conversation with me. He goes, listen, you're going to be doing all these things. You're going to be inferring these things. Are you okay with that? And I went, yeah, absolutely. And I said, but you're also going to be wearing makeup. And I said, I draw the line there. And
wow.
And it was this weird holdover, because my brain went, all the times I've been made fun of for doing musical theater, the one thing that I haven't done is put on makeup. And that was the thing that was, for some reason, that was my trip point.
Transphobia.
Yeah. But that was growing up in an environment where that was made fun of. And it wasn't until I started doing more theater that I realized, oh no, they do that because you're going to lose your face.
Yeah.
The light's hitting your face. And also, everyone does that. Yeah. Why is that your qualm? And years later, I remember doing Rocky Horror Picture Show and having a director come to me and he's like, just so you know, you'll be in full drag. You're playing Frankenfurter. Are you okay in heels? And I was like, I'm fine with everything. I've just never put on heels before. He's like, you should probably figure that out, because
you got to practice, buddy.
It's gonna be a whole thing. But it was interesting to be. They were like, oh, and you're okay with the drag makeup? I was like, the makeup's fine. I don't give a shit about that. But it's weird that these were the little stigmas. But I specifically remember processing. I just had it, and I'm the first person to admit this. I ended up cheating on someone at the time that I was doing the last 5 years, which unfortunately lined up very well with the plot. And having to explore what that meant to portray someone in that world and what that meant to do that definitely took on a whole new meaning. Yeah. It was a thing of like, oh, wait a minute, why he's the bad guy? He starts off, everyone's rooting for him. Why does everyone hate him at the end? Oh, okay, wait a minute. No, it's not just betraying someone's trust. You're lying to them. There's a health side to all this.
Yeah.
If you're keeping someone secret, you're not testing yourself between partners. There's more to this. And it was a thing of realizing, okay, wait a minute. And like, while I knew from education to always get tested between partners, and specifically going out of my way to do that, it was still a thing of like realizing, no, your stuff has ramifications. The fact that I'm processing it in front of a group is not necessarily what everyone does, but that was where I figured out how to process things.
Yeah. Art and life.
Weird juxtaposition.
Yeah, truly. And so in your formative sex education, because obviously, it seems like the vast majority of lessons, similar to most of us, were from the media and from your experiences in theater, which honestly, growing up in theater, it does teach you so much about sex and relationships, and
would not have been the same person I was
100%.
if I hadn't experienced it.
100%. Yeah. Do you remember much of anything from what you were formally taught in classes?
I do. I remember the first course we were taught was a good old fashioned scare tactic.
Yep.
That was the one that was right out the bat. They went, up on the board, we're going to watch a movie, and then I'm going to show you some photos. And it felt like a police interrogation, because I remember the teacher walked in, and even at the time, like, we weren't talking about being trans. We weren't talking about these different things. But I remember even at the time, a buddy of mine was in the closet. I knew he was in the closet about it. I knew that the sexual education we were about to be taught was not going to feature that stuff. I had teachers that I knew were in same-sex marriages. But I remember on that first day being told, and after lunch, all the boys are going to go in that room, all the girls are going to go in that room, and we're going to learn about sex. And everyone was so nervous to even learn two different disciplines of it that I remember that first time being mostly, okay, here's a photo of what this could look like if you get an STD.
Mm-hmm.
Here is what happens when they get pregnant. This can happen from this. Not all birth control works. And it was the large swings of it. But I remember it was framed in a way that says you're learning about male to female, and you're learning your side, and they're going to learn theirs. And I remember the teacher, I remember raising my hand because I was, A, anytime I get uncomfortable, I make jokes. But B, was just genuinely curious. And I remember distinctly asking the sentence, how do they feel about that?
Mm.
And like, I meant it more in the sense of like, is there another set of information here that we're just not getting? Because like, we were given that assigned reading, but as you and I have said previously, we didn't read. So they would be like, here are some books, that'll answer the rest. And I'm like, I'm at a school for kids who can't read and have disabilities, and you're handing me literature that has no pictures. The only pictures that you've now shown me are terrible ramifications of it. Everything I now know of this is not pleasure-based. It's all fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking all that knowledge and comparing it to Sex and the City and watching shows and movies where I'm like, okay, well then why'd they do this? Why is the punchline that makes this joke not funny?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, then that's a problematic scene. Like, even thinking back to, it's as silly as it is, the Mel Gibson movie, What Women Want.
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And, but here's the thing. I didn't know better.
Yeah.
Now, also being Jewish, turns out he had multiple problems. But that was a separate issue entirely.
Oh God.
But it's this thing of like, everything I learned was through trope.
Yeah.
And not through a resource.
Mm-hmm. I
always learned it's like, oh, they always wrap themselves in a sheet and then he puts on his boots and leaves the room. And I'm like, why is that? Huh?
Yeah.
Or like not even learning like why women have to use the restroom after.
Yeah.
Or like things that are great things to know early on that were completely skimmed by. And then, and because I know my father's not going to be listening to this, but he should. Everyone should listen
Dad.
to the podcast. But he just doesn't understand technology.
Yeah.
I specifically remember I grew up in a divorced home. My mom did the best she could raising me. She did a phenomenal job. And to her credit, I learned a lot. My dad was in the picture a bit, and he was always kind. I never really had a lot of the stuff that would come from that world. Just I knew that they were two separate worlds. And my dad and I never really had the pillar conversations that we were supposed to have. Like the things where it was like, he tried to sit me down one day to have the sex talk and the birds and the bees talk. And I remember we're sitting on his couch at his apartment, and he's holding the book that I was supposed to have read. So I'm already at a loss. And he goes, so according to these talking points, we should. And I said, Dad, I'm going to stop you right there.
Dad.
You know what? I already know enough. I've learned it from media. I've learned it from other sources on the internet. We don't have to do this. I already know about it. And he was like, great.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Awesome.
I'm out.
That's fantastic. Great. Mini golf?
Oh, God.
And I remember going and doing mini golf instead of having that formative talk. And I think back to that class where we're presented all this one-sided information. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not getting the whole picture here. I'm not learning what I need to know. I can't really go to my mom about this. And my mom was seeing someone at the time, and I asked him a few questions about it, and he was nice enough to explain some stuff. But everything I learned, I had to learn through media. I had to learn through porn. I had to learn through just different forms.
Yeah, whatever you can get your hands on.
Whatever I could get my hands on.
No pun intended.
It was, I was going to say, solid work.
Thank you.
But it was a thing of like, I'm very grateful to the first few partners that I had that were willing to answer questions that I didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And there were moments and things where I just was just trying to get the information. I was just trying to get clarity on certain things. And like, you have the societal pressures to lose your virginity and all those sorts of things. But I didn't have that fundamental education base. Now we cut back to 5th grade. I've now moved to a different school. I'm jumping back to 6th grade. I've now moved to a different school. So I got kicked out of that one. And they recommended Oregon, sending me over to there. And my parents said, no, there's a small school that's saying that they're starting to do this sort of program. This probably is where you belong. And I remember the sex ed class for that because it was 7 guys. It was 7 of us. Half of them were emotionally immature just because of a lot of the neurodivergence that was there. We walk into the school counselor office, and on the table is 4 pamphlets, a banana, and a condom.
God.
And she goes, yeah, this is great. And she goes, okay, so we're going to do a review. Who knows how to use this? And everyone's giggling and being shy about it. And everyone's like making jokes and not actually doing it. And I could tell that the teacher's getting frustrated. And I know this from watching like TV shows of like, okay, this is how a condom works. So I was like, just give it to me. We're done. Are we good? None of them are paying attention. Can I just come see you and ask questions separately later? And we dispersed. We went over the larger stuff of just like, hey, don't get someone pregnant, these sorts of things, but nothing about STIs. We never learned anything about as far as getting yourself tested. Mm-hmm. We never learned anything about types of contraception. We never learned about birth rate. We never learned about any of the actual ramifications of what this is. Much less, I did not hear the word consent until I got to college. Mm-hmm. The word consent.
Yeah.
And that was something that was such an interesting thing to not even go over. And I get it. Some teachers aren't meant to be teaching that subject matter. And it should be someone who is educated to handle it. But I distinctly remember both times that I was taught in a formal setting, the educator involved was not aware of the audience that they were speaking to.
Because they were just as uncomfortable. And they lacked the tools as well.
They were just as uncomfortable.
They lacked the tools. They were just as uncomfortable.
And we didn't help the scenario.
Yeah. And they also have restrictions of what they can and can't say, you know? Like there are restrictions on those things. And they're all everybody in that room is trying to get over it as quickly as possible. Like get in, get out, get done. That's it.
Which is what I thought is what you were supposed to do.
Exactly.
But as it turns out, that's not the case.
You know why? Because you ask questions, which
you ask questions.
We all need to ask questions all the time, which brings me to it's time for a pop quiz. Ooh. So, and this is kind of on topic with, the fact that you didn't learn the other side. So let's see if you know anything. How many?
Oh, this is gonna be
How many phases are there in a menstrual cycle?
I don't know.
Exactly. That's why it's the pop quiz. There are 4. There's menstruation, the follicular phase, ovulation, and luteal. So during menstruation, that's when the uterus lining sheds. That's when we bleed. Everything is whoop, get on out. Then you have the follicular phase, and that is when the pituitary gland is telling the brain to release hormones that are going to stimulate the production of follicles in hopes that one will turn into an egg and the uterus lining begins to thicken. Then you have ovulation. That's when the mature egg from the follicles, that's when it's going to be released, and from the ovary, it's going to travel into the fallopian tube, waiting for that cute little sperm that's going to say, let's make a human being. It's going to live there for about 24 hours. That's why the way that pregnancy works, really. So the egg can live for 24 hours once it's released. So ovulation generally is about 16 to 32 hours, something like that. That's around the window. Sperm can live in the body for up to 5 days. So that's why your fertile window is different than your ovulation, because you can be fertile for more days because that sperm can live in the body for a little bit longer. But realistically, you can only get pregnant in a very small window of time. It's just that the sperm happens to be living there and all the timing works out, blah, blah, blah. But if that timing does not work out, then you enter the luteal phase. And that's where there's more thickening. This is if you do get pregnant. Things thicken up.
I was about to ask.
I skipped a phase there. Progesterone is released in the uterus. It makes it really nice and prepping it for pregnancy. It's like, yeah, fucking game on. That egg was released. We're going to do this. We're going to make a human being. And then it's like, okay. So there's no embryo coming? Nobody's coming? They're not coming? All right, fuck it. We're out. Menstruation. So 4 phases of building up the uterus, prepping the uterus, getting it ready for human beings to be grown, and then being like, they ain't nobody coming. Clean it all out. Party's over. No party.
See, I on behalf of myself and every listener, we're going to go ahead and need to hear your version of Osmosis Jones. So if you would not mind hitting up that deleted After Dark special version of that show, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, this stuff is, we don't talk about it enough. So that's why we're here.
No, we don't. We really don't.
Also, I would like to give a very special happy birthday to you, sir, because this episode is being released on the day of your birth. Happy birthday, Oliver.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Here, I didn't bring anything for you. No, I know that we are very similar in birthdays. Yeah. So I happy soon to be birthday to you as well.
Thank you.
I am over the moon that we're both Leos in the way that we are.
Me too. We're fun. We're great. I can't wait to start performing with you again. It's going to be
I'm so
fun
excited.
to share a stage with you.
Oh, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for doing this. Is there anything that perhaps you would like to have as a final thought here? Anything else that you would like to say about sex education?
I think it's just a thing of don't be afraid to say no to not knowing something. Like, first of all, don't be afraid to say no in general. But like just the idea of like, some people don't know something. They don't know that they need to ask that question. So don't assume someone knows something. Give them the chance to have the answer of, no, I don't know that. And I think that's important. So yeah. And also thank you so much for taking the time. I learned something new today.
Yay! We love that. I'm sure a lot of listeners learned something new about the menstrual cycle and how many phases are actually in it and what those phases do.
Yes.
Oh, what was I going to say? I was going to say something. Oh yeah. Are you promoting anything?
No idea.
Where can people find you, and are you promoting anything?
I am not promoting anything at the current moment. For the first time in my life, I can confidently say I'm not promoting something at this current moment. But what I am promoting is your show, which is incredible to be on and a huge guest. Everyone can find me just via Oliver Berger. That's all my socials are lined up to that. But yeah. That's where I am.
Yay. And then if you're in Los Angeles, come and see us at the Rockin' Awesome Improv Show at the Youth Academy of Dramatic Arts.
which is a kid's show and won't be mentioning any of this, but we will. But feel free to come on out.
It will not have anything to do with sex or sexuality. There will be no blue comedy there, no cursing, nothing about death or fights or anything mean. It's happy and fun and very different from this conversation.
What a delight.
What a delight. If you liked this podcast, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Send it to a friend who needs to know about the menstrual cycle. Give me a 5-star review because that always helps things. And if you have a question that you would like me to ask a guest in our pop quiz, go ahead and leave it in that review and I will give you a shout out. Thank you for joining, Oliver. Thank you again for coming on the show. I adore you. I'm so excited for this next phase for both of us and all we will do together and separately. And thank you all for listening. Goodbye.